My earliest memory of my father is not his laughter or his embrace but the soft, bluish glow of the living room screen. Even as a child, I knew that once the rest of the house had fallen silent, he would remain awake, eyes fixed on the television, a mug of coffee cooling beside him. To me, it seemed ordinary. Fathers had their quirks, and mine simply enjoyed movies more than sleep. At least, that was what I told myself. Our family was small, just the three of us. My mother, weary yet gentle, carried the weight of the household with quiet diligence. She rose before dawn, ironed clothes, prepared meals, and still managed to hold down her job at the school office. My father, in contrast, had an aura of unpredictability. By day, he appeared hardworking and responsible, yet by night, he seemed transformed, withdrawn, restless, almost secretive. The first time I noticed the strangeness, I must have been 7 or 8. I awoke thirsty, padded down the hallway in my pajamas, and found him sitting alone. The movie's volume was low, barely audible, but the screen's glow painted his face in sharp outlines, tired yet intent. He did not notice me. I lingered in the doorway, then slipped away quietly. It felt intrusive to interrupt. As the years passed, the habit grew more conspicuous. His nights stretched longer, his mornings shortened. He stumbled into the kitchen bleary-eyed, stifling yawns, pretending he had slept well. My mother would look at him, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she rarely spoke of it. Her silence was not ignorance, it was survival. Confrontations required energy she no longer possessed. I, however, could not ignore the details. The coffee cups multiplying by the sink. The faint odor of tobacco, though he never smoked during the day. The hollow laughter drifting down the hallway when the house should have been wrapped in sleep. His movies, I realized, were not always the ones we kept neatly arranged on the shelf. When I asked him what he had been watching, he answered too quickly, naming films I knew by heart but had not heard playing. My curiosity sharpened into unease. At school, when friends gushed about late-night family outings or vacations, I thought of our house at midnight, the walls hushed, my mother's breathing steady in sleep, and my father isolated in his glow-lit world. A wall of light divided him from us, though none of us dared call it that. There were times I almost confronted him. Nights when I pressed my ear to the living room door and felt the rhythm of muffled voices, as though he were not watching but listening, responding. Once, I thought I heard him laugh in a way I had never heard before, soft and almost tender. I drew back as though burned. Perhaps it was nothing, perhaps only the plot of a film. Still, the sound unsettled me, because it seemed meant for someone else. My mother must have sensed something similar. She grew quieter, her movements heavier. She asked fewer questions about his nights, filling the air instead with practical chatter, grocery lists, utility bills, reminders about my homework. The more she busied herself, the more his habit was allowed to exist unchallenged. Yet every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, I caught her staring at him with a sadness that no words could soften. I learned to measure time not by clocks but by his footsteps. The creak of the stairs at midnight, the faint shuffle toward the kitchen, the click of the remote control. These became my lullabies, signals that all was as it had been the night before, familiar, but never comforting. Still, I wanted to believe in the simplest version of the truth: my father just loved movies. Perhaps he needed them to unwind, perhaps the world of stories offered him something real life could not. I clung to that explanation because it was easier than imagining alternatives. Yet deep down, I knew stories end, and secrets surface. My father's routine was not harmless distraction but the shadow of something unspoken. Each night he remained downstairs, each lie told with 2 smoothies, chipped away at the foundation of the family I thought we were. One night, as I drifted towards sleep, I caught myself whispering a question into the darkness, as if daring the silence to answer, "What does Daddy really watch all night?" The question lingered, heavier than dreams. I did not yet know the truth, but I felt it, looming, inevitable, waiting just beyond the glow of that screen. It happened on a night when the air felt heavier than usual, the kind that pressed against the walls and made the curtains hang limp. I lay awake, unable to surrender to sleep, listening to the creaks of the house as though it were breathing. Then I heard it, the soft hum of the television, drifting faintly down the hallway like a secret invitation. By then, I was no longer a child content with half answers. I was old enough to recognize patterns, to sense that truth hid in shadows. My father's nightly ritual had become too deliberate, too carefully concealed. Answer. Restless and burning with curiosity, I slipped from my bed and padded toward the glow. The living room door was half closed, leaving only a sliver of light to slice through the darkened hall. I pressed myself against the wall, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I expected to hear the familiar soundtracks of old films, the swelling orchestras, the muffled explosions. Instead, I heard something else. A voice, feminine, warm, unmistakably alive. My pulse quickened. She was speaking softly, almost playfully, as though sharing an inside joke. Then came my father's voice in response, lighter than I had ever heard it, laced with a tenderness absent from our household. The words blurred together, too hushed for me to catch fully, but the cadence was unmistakable: intimacy. This was not the voice of a man commenting on a film. This was a man in conversation, with someone who was not my mother. I edged closer, the floor groaning beneath my weight. Through the crack, I caught a glimpse of the screen. Not a movie, not even a television program, but the glowing frame of a video call. A woman filled the space, her face bright and smiling, her laughter spilling out as though it belonged in our home. The sight froze me. My body stiffened with the instinct to flee, yet my eyes refused to close. My father leaned toward the screen, his expression transformed. It was not the weary mask he wore at breakfast, nor the distracted frown he offered my mother. It was softer, alive, almost youthful. I retreated silently, heart pounding. In that moment, I wanted to believe I had misinterpreted what I saw. Perhaps it was innocent, a coworker, a distant cousin, an old friend. But the way he gazed at her, the way his laughter lingered, told me otherwise. It was not friendship, it was something more dangerous. Back in my room, I curled beneath the blanket, trembling. My mind raced with explanations, excuses, anything to soften the image seared into my memory. But no matter how I tried to twist it, the truth clung stubbornly: my father was not watching movies. He was living another life, and I had stumbled into it by accident. The following morning, I searched his face for cracks, for guilt, but he played his part too well. He kissed my mother's cheek absently, muttered about traffic, and disappeared behind the safety of his work routine. My mother, meanwhile, wore her quiet sadness like armor, unaware of the screen-lit betrayals unfolding while she slept. I carried the knowledge like a stone in my chest. Every glance, every exchange at the breakfast table felt altered, poisoned by what I now knew. I wanted to tell my mother, to shatter her silence with mine, but I also feared the devastation it would bring. Could I be the one to splinter what little peace remained between them? Could I destroy her trust in the man she had built her life around? For days, I said nothing. But the secret grew louder. Each night, when the house settled into its uneasy stillness, I imagined him downstairs again, whispering, laughing, sharing fragments of himself with someone who had no claim to them. The thought hollowed me. One evening, unable to resist, I crept down again. This time, I dared a longer look. The woman was there, radiant on the screen. My father leaned close, murmuring words I could not make out, though his tone left no room for doubt. The intimacy between them pulsed like a current. He was hers in a way he no longer seemed ours. I stepped back into the shadows, my throat tight with unspoken words. The child in me longed to scream, to demand answers, to shake him awake from his betrayal. But the older, wiser part of me stayed silent. I understood, with sudden clarity, that silence was its own prison, and I was locked inside it. That night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered the truth to myself, the words tasting bitter: Daddy isn't watching movies at all. It was the first time I allowed the thought to take shape, and once spoken, it refused to disappear. Silence became the fourth member of our household. It crept into meals, sat between us on the couch, followed us up the stairs at night. My father still performed his daytime role with practiced ease, smiles at the neighbors, casual questions about my schoolwork, nods and grunts during my mother's stories. But underneath, I felt the fissures widening, invisible cracks stretching across the walls of our home. My mother grew more withdrawn. She did not confront him directly, but her glances lingered longer, searching for answers that never came. I often caught her staring at his phone when he left it unattended, as though the device itself whispered truths she could not yet hear. But each time, she turned away, unwilling to touch the wound she already sensed. I lived suspended between them, carrying the weight of knowledge neither wanted to name. Each night, as the television's glow filled the downstairs rooms, I lay awake, suffocating beneath the burden. The laughter drifting upward was unbearable, so careless, so wrong. The strain finally broke me one evening after dinner. We sat at the table, plates cleared, the remnants of a simple meal still lingering in the air. My mother excused herself to prepare for bed, leaving me alone with him. The silence pressed too heavily, I could no longer contain it. "Daddy," I asked, my voice quiet, careful, "why do you stay up watching movies all night?" The words hung between us, sharper than I intended. His fork paused midway to his mouth. For the first time, he looked directly at me, really looked. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, fear, calculation. "What do you mean?" he said too quickly, forcing the laugh. "I just like them. Helps me relax." But his laugh was hollow, brittle, and I did not return it. I stared at him steadily, remembering the glow of the screen, the woman's voice, his softened smile. My silence pressed harder than words. He shifted uncomfortably, setting down his fork. "Don't stay up worrying about me," he added, his tone uneven. "Go to bed, all right. You've got school in the morning." I should have obeyed. I should have let it slip, as I had so many times before. But the memory of his other voice, the one he reserved for her, burned in me. I couldn't hold it anymore. "I've seen," I whispered. His body stiffened. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath the kitchen light. "Seen what?" His voice was sharp now, defensive, as though cornered. "The screen." "The woman," I said, each word deliberate. My hands trembled, but my gaze did not falter. "You're not watching movies." The silence that followed was deafening. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no excuses came. At last, he rubbed his forehead, weary, as though the mask had grown too heavy. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice breaking. "It's complicated. Complicated." The words stung. Love should not be complicated. Family should not be complicated. Yet here he was, shrinking into himself, begging me to accept an explanation that was no explanation at all. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. "Why, Daddy?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do that to us? To Mom?" He pushed back his chair abruptly, standing as if to flee. But instead, he crouched before me, his eyes desperate. "Please," he whispered, "don't tell your mother. She wouldn't understand. You'll break her heart." His plea was a blade twisting inside me. He was not denying it anymore, he was recruiting me into his secret, binding me with guilt. The betrayal deepened, not only of my mother, but of me. I was no longer a child, I was a conspirator in his silence. "I don't want to lie," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You won't have to," he urged, gripping my hands. "Just don't say anything. Let it go, for her sake. For ours. For ours." The words rang false. His, ours, no longer included my mother, perhaps not even me. Still, I nodded faintly, because I was too broken to resist. He took my silence as agreement, relief flooding his features. That night, I lay in bed with his plea echoing inside me. The house felt colder, emptier. I had confronted him, and though I had pulled away his mask, the truth had not set me free. Instead, it chained me tighter, leaving me tangled in a secret that did not belong to me. I realized then that I had crossed an invisible threshold. I could no longer pretend, no longer cling to the illusion of ordinary nights. Something had fractured, something irreparable. And though the house still stood, our family was already beginning to collapse. The truth, once revealed, never stayed silent for long. My father's plea for secrecy had bound me in guilt, but the weight of it pressed heavier each day. I avoided my mother's eyes at breakfast, unable to meet the quiet sadness in them, fearful she would recognize my silence as complicity. Nights grew unbearable, knowing what I knew, hearing the same laughter spill from the living room, wondering how much longer this fragile charade could endure. It ended not with my words, but with hers. One evening, My mother appeared at the top of the stairs long after she should have been asleep. I had been sitting in my room, clutching a book I could not read, when I heard her footsteps descend. Curious and terrified, I crept to the landing, heart thundering. From my vantage, I saw her pause in the hallway, staring at the half-closed living room door, her face illuminated faintly by the blue glow seeping through. She stood there for a long moment, frozen in hesitation, before she pushed the door open. The silence that followed was short, sharp, and then came the sound of her voice, steady at first, then breaking. I could not hear her exact words, only the rawness of them. My father's tone rose in response, defensive, frantic, then pleading. Dishes clattered, a chair scraped, and the house filled with a storm of voices no wall could contain. I did not rush to her. I did not rush to him. I stood there trembling, caught in the middle, wishing I could vanish into the floorboards. It was no longer a secret shared between father and daughter. It was out, undeniable, unstoppable. By the time the shouting subsided, the living room lay in disarray, an overturned mug, a scattering of papers, silence heavier than any words. My father moved about quickly, shoving clothes into a bag, his face a mask of anger and shame. My mother sat on the couch, her hands pressed against her face, sobbing quietly, broken not just by betrayal but by years of endurance finally snapping. I will never forget the look he gave me as he left. Not a father's look, not even a guilty man's, but something emptier, like a stranger passing in the street. He shut the door behind him, and with that sound, a chapter of our lives closed forever. In the days that followed, the house felt cavernous. His absence was both a wound and a relief. There was no more glow from the television at night, no muffled laughter seeping through the walls, no need to measure time by his footsteps. My mother moved through the rooms slowly, as though relearning their shape. She no longer avoided the truth, she lived with it openly, though her eyes carried a hollowness that words could not heal. For me, the silence was sharper. I had lost not just a father but the image of him I once clung to. Childhood had ended in the crack of a door and the sound of another woman's laughter. What remained was not innocence but clarity. And yet, clarity carries its own kind of strength. I learned that love, in its truest form, demands honesty. That silence, though it may preserve peace for a time, can also corrode from within. I learned that adults are not invincible, that they can falter, deceive, and crumble just as easily as anyone else. My father's betrayal was a wound, but it also revealed a truth about humanity. We are fragile, flawed, often unworthy of the trust given to us, yet still capable of endurance. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint echo of a television in my mind, and the memory rises unbidden, the glow on his face, the warmth in his voice that was never meant for us. It haunts me, but it no longer defines me. What defines me is the choice to keep going, to refuse to let his betrayal unravel the person I am becoming. My mother and I, in our quiet way, began to rebuild, not by pretending nothing happened, but by acknowledging it did. When people ask me about my father now, I rarely speak of the nights he stayed awake watching movies. Instead, I speak of what I learned from him, lessons carved out of loss, painful yet permanent. I know now that families do not always fall apart in spectacular ways. Sometimes, they unravel softly, thread by thread, until one day there is nothing left to hold them together. That is what happened to us. And though I wish it had been different, though I wish he had chosen us instead of the glow of that screen, I cannot change the past. All I can do is carry its weight with me, not as a chain but as a reminder. Because the truth is this, my daddy did not simply watch movies all night. He watched our family dissolve, and in doing so, he taught me the cost of silence. And I will never forget it.